السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الأولين، اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الآخرين، اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين، اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في كل وقت وحين. وبعد، inshallah, nice to be with you all this evening. Inshallah, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Suhailullah. I am here today representing the Khalil Center. I'm the director at the Khalil Center. We're actually a Muslim mental health organization. We work helping people through various life stress and distress, and helping families, couples, individuals dealing with their various mental health related struggles and challenges, and sometimes illness. I'm also the resident scholar at the Islamic Society of West Valley in Kunabo Park, not too far from here, and I'm also served as a chaplain at UCLA and CSUN, the Muslim chaplain through IOK. So today we have hopefully an interesting discussion. It's not too heavy of a discussion because I don't think we're going to talk about things that are not that you're not unfamiliar with. But I'm hoping that it will be some food for thought, inshallah ta'ala, and hopefully try to make it a little discussion based. And so please, if you have anything you want to add, share, comment on, thumbs up, thumbs down, like, dislike, please, let's make it a conversation, inshallah. We're talking today about Islam and ethnic diversity. That's what I was asked to speak about. And hopefully in the future we'll be able to conquer some more of the difficult conversations as it relates to I think the general broader title of the program was social and religious pluralism in Islam, right? And so there's other things to talk about in this realm when we talk about dealing or living, coexisting with people who may or may not share the same values as us as Muslims, and how do we navigate those grounds, and those can get a little more, there's a little more that needs to be understood and a little more nuance that needs to be explored when you start talking about people with different faith, people who don't have any faith at all, who don't believe in God, and so forth. And then when you talk about lifestyles, and especially the lifestyles that are really the hot topics of this day and age, everything related to sexuality and so forth. And so perhaps we can discuss some of those things in the future. So today, like I said, we'll be talking about Islam and ethnic diversity, inshallah ta'ala. So at the very core of this discussion is to understand ethnic diversity, you have to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. And we read in Surah Al-Hujurat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu, inna akramakum 'inda Allahi atqakum, inna Allaha alimun khabir. This ayah is often quoted in talking about Islam's perception and perspective of humanity as a whole, and the multiplicity that is there within the unity of humanity. And there are other ayats like it also. When you read in Surah An-Nisa, the first ayah, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum, Ya ayyuhan nas, يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. Another ayah that addresses humanity. You notice in both of these ayahs, Allah addresses all of humanity. Ya ayyuhan nas, all people, all mankind, all humanity. And so it's a general call. And if you notice in Islam, there's different types of calls. There is, like we read here, Ya ayyuhan nas, it's a call to everyone. There's Ya ahl al-kitab. There is an address specifically to the people of the book. And there's Ya ayyuhal mu'mineen, or Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu, right? Oh, you who believe. And so you have these different calls in the Quran. This one is to all of humanity. And so, maybe I'll stand up. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us the origin of everyone. And that we all come from one man, one woman, as you all know, Adam and Eve. And that Allah has made us into nations and tribes so that we may know one another. And what is distinguishing between us is not the fact, and what is distinguishing between us in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's eyes is not the fact that I come from this country and you come from that country, or you're native to this country, or whatever it may be. It's the fact that we all come from one original source, but what distinguishes us is not the differences, but our standing in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. And this is of primary importance to us, this concept as Muslims. And but what is important to us in the context that we're talking about here is this concept of we have made you in nations and tribes for the purpose of knowing one another. And this is really important, right? At-ta'aruf, the concept of ta'aruf. The ta'aruf, in the Arabic language, there's different verb forms. So one of them is tafa'ala. And here you have ta'arafa, which indicates that there's two parties, right? There's two parties. If you say, for example, tabadala in the Arabic language, it means there's an exchange between two parties. So this indicates that there's an exchange between two parties, and when those two parties meet, there's a purpose in that, and the purpose in that is for people to know one another, right? And it's a very what do you call it? A very explicit call for humanity to get to know one another, and for us not to be people who are stuck to our tribe, right? Who are stuck to our people, whatever that means. I don't know what that means, honestly, our people. But if somebody has that notion, right? And we know that's very common in the Muslim community. We have, unfortunately, we have a great opportunity in America where Muslims come from all different parts of the world. And alhamdulillah, in many of our masajid, and I believe including here to an extent, that there is a mix of different people from different places. We get together, but oftentimes, and perhaps this applies here too, I don't know the dynamics of the community, but there is this ta'ifiyya, there is this, partisanship to different people and their specific ethnicities, right? And people are stuck with their own people, and they don't move beyond that. And in America, we have an excellent opportunity because we're not one people. We're so many different people from so many different places, right? There is so much beauty in our deen, from an ethnic perspective in terms of all of the different places we come from. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us that, He tells us why He put us here, right? We have made you into peoples and tribes so that you may get to know one another. And so there is beauty in that diversity. And also when you look, and this is in Surah Al-Rum, right? Another ayah that perhaps many of you are familiar with, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. This is the ayahs often quoted in on the wedding night, right? From Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's signs that He has made for you, He has created for you spouses from among yourselves so that you may find comfort in them. And He has placed between you compassion and mercy. Then look at the next ayah. This is what's interesting, and this is why I brought this here. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالِمِينَ. That and of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's signs is the fact that He created the heavens and the earth and the diversity of your languages and your colors. Right? And so here Allah is is telling us and focusing us on the fact that from amongst His power, His infinite knowledge and His infinite ability, He has created for us differently. Right? He has created us differently. We speak different languages and we have different backgrounds, we have different colors based on where we come from in the world and so forth, right? And that's a beautiful thing. The people that understand that are people who are people of sound knowledge. Sound knowledge, they recognize Allah's authority and the fact that this is how He has created the world, and that is a beautiful thing for us. Now, these two ayahs together, when these two ayahs together, there's an implication that's perhaps to be taken there. When you read these two ayahs together, the first ayah being about mawadda and rahmah, right? Love and mercy between spouses, and the second ayah about the diversity. What do you perhaps extract from that? Yes, right? Look at that. These ayahs are paired together. That in Islam, we're not. We have such a beautiful diversity in the world around us, but unfortunately, oftentimes when it comes to marriage, we get very constricted, right? Like somebody wants to marry from back home, wherever that may be, not only from back home, but then from the particular village or town or wherever they come from. Or they don't even want to marry outside of their family because forget it, we don't trust the world, right? But look what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. After He talks about the beauty of marriage, then He says, and from among His side, the creation of the heavens and earth and your differences in tongue and color, right? Which is a very important indication. So that's something for mothers, fathers to consider. I'm looking at a lot of you, and I know maybe we're all in the same age range here, plus or minus some, at least adults. Young people are getting to that age where they will be married soon. And I know that may be a scary thought for parents, maybe a scary thought for you guys, that are getting to that point. But it's important that as we're getting to that point, that you have a criteria that you're looking at, right? This is the criteria. What's the criteria? What's the criteria? Taqwa, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he says, Al-mar'atu tunkahu li-arba'. A woman is married for 4 things. For what? Help me out. Her deen, her wealth, her beauty, and her lineage, her status, right? And what does he say at the end of the hadith? فَاظْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكَ. He says, you will be victorious with the one who has deen, right? You will be successful if you choose the one that has deen, not the one that come from Pakistan or India or wherever, right? So when we talk about this subject matter, well, what's the practical implications? Okay, beauty and diversity, and okay, Muslims, we recognize and we acknowledge and we're supposed to know different people from different places. Well, what's the implication of that? When your son or your daughter comes to you and they say, Mama, Baba, I have met such and such, right? Oh, he's Pakistani, right? Right? Or is it, let's sit down and talk. Tell me about them. And you have no preconceived notions of where they are, what you want to. I can understand, when people, maybe mom and dad, they have a child who's now in their 20s and now they're ready to get married. Mom only speaks, let's say Urdu, for example. It can be difficult to now, if you can have a daughter-in-law that you don't speak the same language. And I can understand those kind of things. But when now you have been living in America for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? I don't know, and your child has chosen someone and they've chosen them based on the fact that they met them in a Muslim context, maybe at the masjid, maybe at MSA or whatever it is. Well, then why you sit with your brother and sister every day from here and there and everywhere, right? And so now why so I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding, right? And hopefully those are reflective of our real, kind of considerations about this. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, I took it into marriage quickly.
How do you change the mentality of thinking in that scenario? Because you're typically used to the same group that you want, for an alliance, grouping yourself with that group.
You're typically aligned for alliances? What kind of alliances you got going on,
Just come up with the alliances between the kids or the youth who want to get married, or grouping with, like you said, they may be interested in a different culture, but they're Muslim. So from the parents' perspective, how do you choose this? Well, you have to be Pakistani, you have to be Indian, or whatever.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Anybody have thoughts on that? How do you change that mentality? Yes.
So my kids are now third generation. My husband and I were born here, and with every generation, I feel like we lose a little bit of culture. Naturally, I think it's that culture that bonds a lot of people. So I think as the generations are going to flush out a little bit, we're going to start mixing a lot with kids that have just been born and raised here. Maybe 2 or 3 generations from now, I think a lot of our kids will be comfortable marrying anyone, despite their culture, just if they're Muslim.
Inshallah. And yeah, definitely we see that, right, as the generation goes on.
My kids are just a little bit busy.
Yeah. So as we go down the generations in America, I mean, the number one is preserving our deen, right? One of the challenges with the generations, the further we get in the American context, there is some challenges in terms of just the preservation of deen, right? And there's other challenges in terms of who's marrying who, marrying outside of Islam and so forth. But that's one way. But how do we do it more intentionally, as opposed to it just happens? It happens.
I think just intentionally, I think culture plays a big role. Like for me, if I'm cooking biryani, I'm really excited to go and eat biryani in someone's house too. So that's embedded, I guess, growing up. It was easier.
Right.
So I'm used to that.
Right.
And I haven't experienced it yet, so I don't know what to expect.
Right.
But at home, we are raising them with the same cultural values and strong diversity that we have within our own culture.
Right.
That makes us who we are. It's our identity. So I still relate to that it should be somewhat similar.
Right.
I think the Muslims are diverse. If you're not seeing diversity in the Muslim that you're attending, then it's going to be really hard for you to be on that concept. I come from like a really small community where we've had like Arabs and Chinese and Pakistanis and Indians. We all within one masjid, and we all grew up together. Most people ended up marrying one culture anyway, because they're first generation and stuff. It was just you're constantly in contact with people from different cultures, and you're not thinking anymore past the fact that they're Muslim.
Right. Yeah, subhanAllah. And that's not to say, all of this is not to say that there's something wrong with marrying within your own culture. No, absolutely not. In fact, in our fiqh, um, there is very hot debates about this is the fuqaha, the scholars, where they talk about a concept called al-kafa'a or al-kufr, that um, uh, in marriage, there's a debate amongst the scholars, should the person that you marry be from the same socioeconomic status as you or something different? And they have some difference of opinion. Imam Maliki says there's no problem, anybody can marry anybody. Imam Shafi'i says no, there should be some level of similarity, because when you marry now two people becoming one, and if there's a great variance that, so I'm not saying, I'm not trying to simplify the matter, just we all, but at the same time, the question is, do you have this in your heart? Do you understand this in your heart? The diversity, the beauty that's there in diversity, and the fact that as we're going to see, that we all come from the same family. And if you have the same deen, there is so much there that's shared, and for that to be pushed aside. Let me tell you like this. We have families in, I won't, there's in many communities that I've dealt with, if a black man comes into the community and fine young man, and he met one of the young women in the community, and now they've been talking, and now they go to their parents. There's what? Don't come here, right? And what is that? And so these things are there. So the point is, how do we? And we'll talk a little bit more about that, inshallah. But the point is, for these concepts, do they really sit in our heart, right? And do we really understand what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is telling us? So Allah tells us, about these differences. If you just look at the world, it's incredible, right? When you start thinking, if you think about the concept of the differences that Allah has placed on this world, and different people and different languages and so forth, it's actually very interesting. The ulama that specialize in linguistics, they actually had these debates that there's two camps. One camp is that languages are divinely given, and I don't know how you would call it, but the impetus or the initial points of how people, because Allah says وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ أَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, right? And that and he taught Adam the names of all things. So they infer from that and other references that Allah is the one who imbued in humanity the ability from different people from different places to speak different languages. And other social scientists or linguists, they say that no, people they brought up in different parts of the world, and based on where they were, and their language developed however it developed, and it has nothing, it's not divine intervention. But it was very interesting, right? So so just this concept and just pondering upon it and so forth. If you look at our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what does he say? And this actually hadith, it starts with Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, inna rabbakum wahid wa inna abakum wahid fala fadla li'arabiyyin ala a'jami wa la ahmar ala aswad illa bittaqwa, right? Verily your Lord is one, your Father is one, there is no virtue of an Arab over a non-Arab, nor of a white person over a black person, except by virtue of taqwa. And this was such a prominent, when did the Prophet ﷺ say this? The last khutbah, right? Khutbatul Wida, right? When he made Hajj, close to the end of his life, about maybe 3 months or so before he passed away from this world. And this is one of his main advices, right? That he focused on. Understand that no one is better than someone else because of this, what color this is. It has nothing to do with anything, right? And then he tells us what ties us together. An-nasu waladu Adam wa Adamu min turab, right? People are the children of Adam, and Adam is from dirt, right? Which means what? What do we infer from that? Simple. What do we infer from that? We're all one family. The human race is one family, right? This is an important concept for us as Muslims to understand. And when you start to talk about pluralism, and others, and which we'll talk about that word others, and one of the fundamental things that we have to recognize is that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells us that look, you're one family. We all are the children of Adam. We said, or we use that word in Urdu. How do you say a person? Huh? Admi. Where does it come from? Adami, right? In Arabic, a person. You all come from. You are our word. The word in Arabic and in Urdu and perhaps in other languages, I'm not sure. The word person comes from the fact that you're an Adamic person. I don't know the right word, how to say that, right? That's a word like that. But that's who we are, right? And so for us to have any notions of superiority, right? This thing that they call white supremacy is such a shaitani concept. It's not a light thing, right? To think that in this country for 400, 500 years, pre the actual formalization of this country, that one of the most prevalent concepts that was used by which this country became what it is in terms of its status was built on the backs of Black people who were stolen from their land and brought here because they didn't understand this, right? And they actually religiously justified the fact that the superiority is based on a religious basis, right? Which is a very scary thing. That was Christian theology for hundreds of years. That Ham is the son of Nuh alayhi salam, and he was Black and he was inferior, and since Black Africans descend from that part of the world and they're from the children of Ham, that they are inferior. That was Christian theology by which they justified, right, the slaughter of, the enslavement of millions and millions of people, and in essence caused the death of millions and millions of people in the transatlantic slave trade and so on and so forth, right? But in Islam, this is very clear. This is very clear. Unfortunately, the question as Imran Bhai asked earlier, well, how do we extract that from our heart, right? Unfortunately, as Muslims, we don't have this planted deep in our heart. Right? If we look at the world today and the reality, and still, you have many of you have been to the Khalij, right? You've been to Saudi Arabia, been to the Emirates, and so forth. You see how people there they treat Muslims who come from other places, whether they're brown or Black, right? Like dirt, right? Black people don't. And do you think most of us here are brown people? You think brown people are treated bad? Black people are treated like garbage, right? And subhanAllah, and this is like the close to the home of where Islam evolved, shows how sad like our state of affairs is, right? And that but these are things points of self-reflection, right? These are things we should be reflecting upon on ourselves. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. If you look, this is really interesting. This is hadith related in Tirmidhi. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Inna Allah khalaqa Adam min qabbatin qabadaha min jami' al-ard." Verily, Allah created Adam from a handful of dust originating from all parts of the earth. The children of Adam emerged according to the different colors of the earth's soil. There emerged from amongst them white, red, black, and others in between. And then the end of the hadith, it actually says, والخبيث والطيب والسهل والحزن وبين ذلك. Excuse me. The evil and the pure and the easygoing and the rough and everybody in between. So it's very interesting. Again, the origin of man. We are from we are created from this earth, right? Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam is fashioned from clay by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that original man is the dirt that he's created from is dirt that's taken from all parts of this world. Which means that what? Which means that you have white, black, red, yellow, everything in your blood, in my blood, right? These constructs, by the way, that they're man-made constructs, right? The constructs of race and so on and so forth. Doesn't mean that there's not some value in understanding things from a geographical, sociological perspective and so forth. But this is our origin, right? And then again, just this concept, this hadith is related in Muslim. إن الله لا ينظر إلى صوركم ولا إلى أموالكم ولكن ينظر إلى قلوبكم وأعمالكم. That Allah doesn't look at your forms or your wealth. It's not the exterior that counts. We put so much emphasis on looks, on the external part of the human being. But the Prophet ﷺ, he reminds us, he says, Allah looks at what? Your hearts and your deeds. That's what's important. That's what makes us Muslim. That's why, that's the only way we can, truly, live up or own or claim Islam is if we actually embody Islam. And Islam is about what's here, right? What's here. And as our lifestyle correspond with having a pure heart that doesn't see the world, based on superiority of external factors and so on and so forth, right? Any questions or thoughts? Okay. Then we have to confront this reality, which we already started talking about a little bit, right? And we can stop here, I think, and have a discussion. Our beloved Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith that's related by Muslim, "Man batta'a bihi amalu, lam yusri' bihi nasabu." He who lags behind in doing good deeds, his noble lineage will not make him go ahead, will not push him forward. Meaning what? That because you're born from some noble Arab tribe, or you're born from, even if you have your Sayyid, right? If your lineage goes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if your deeds are not there, if you haven't lived the life that a Muslim should live, your lineage is not going to benefit you, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم. The day in which no one will be benefited, not by their children, not by their wealth, by nothing, no external factors, but rather the one who comes to Allah with a sound heart, right? With a sound heart. And part of having a sound heart is having a proper conceptualization of where you stand in the world and of who you are compared to everybody else, right? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. And I want somebody to share what they think the meaning of this hadith is. That no one truly believes until they love for their brother what they love for themselves. Right? No one truly believes what they love for their brother until they love for their brother what they love for themselves. Why am I bringing that hadith up here in this context? What are some extractions that we take from that? Anybody?
I think it's about double standards. meaning, the certain rules for yourself, but for others there will be different rules.
Nice, SubhanAllah. That's nice. How can you want less for others if you are in fact the same as them from a human family standpoint? Beautiful, very good, very beautiful extraction. This is what happens when you think together. Yes, sister.
I think it also teaches about empathy and like relating to people on a human level as opposed to seeing them as like different just because they have a different skin color or they're born in a different country.
Beautiful. The relatability that we have one with one another. Excellent. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? No one truly believes until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. What's the golden rule? Yes, young man.
Judging people by what they look like.
I'm sorry?
Like judging people by what they look like and what they do.
Expand on that.
Like make examples like an auntie would look at another auntie and be like, I want that. She's wearing that. Like judging each other.
Why take it to the auntie there? Okay, no, excellent. No, thank you for that. Anybody else? What's the golden rule?
I think it goes back to what you started with, that we're all children of God. We're from the same mother and father. We're going to treat each other the same the way we expect to be treated.
Yeah, exactly. What? By the way, this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, no one truly believes until he loves for his brother / his sister, until he loves for himself, herself. Brother or sister here, who's being referred to? Which kind of brother? In humanity. Imam al-Nawawi, he says, al-akh fil insaniyya, the brother in humanity. Right? It's not talking about your Muslim brother or anybody, everybody. Right? What's the golden rule? They call it the golden rule. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you, right? Think about this for a minute. This, I didn't put it up on the screen. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The Prophet says, you don't have true iman until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. There's a slight difference there. And it's quite profound when you think about it. What is that?
One is an action and the other one is more internal.
Yes, beautiful. And so explain that.
So when you could pretend to do something and that manifests in an action that you do, but when it's in your heart and you really believe it, and that's what I think the Prophet is.
SubhanAllah. So which rule is, I mean, we're talking about not being superior or inferior, but I'm going to say which rule is superior? The one that comes from the heart, the one that comes from the Prophet. So I said, it says, you don't truly believe until you love, you have a feeling inside of you. Like it has to be in here, it has to be deep, it has to, the other one is just on external, do unto others as doing, not putting it down or something. It is something to live by. But the Prophet ﷺ, he gives us something deeper by which to live by. So I just thought I would bring it up. The Prophet ﷺ, he says in the hadith that's related by Abu Dawood, ليس منا من دعا إلى عصبية وليس منا من قاتل على عصبية وليس منا من مات على عصبية. He who calls to tribalism / racism is not from us. He who fights for tribalistic reasons or for racist reasons is not from us. He who dies upholding tribalism is not from amongst us. The warnings are severe in Islam. So one is the virtue of it, but then the other side is the warning of it, right? The virtue of what it means of understanding the beauty and diversity, and the other part is if you don't understand and you treat people in that way or you see things in that way, then there is also a negative consequence that is tied up on that. You know, there's a famous incident that took place during the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is when Sayyidina Bilal, radiallahu anhu, he was called by Abu Dhar. Sayyidina Abu Dhar said to Bilal, he said, Yabna Sauda. He said, "Oh, son of a black woman." He was mad at they had an argument about something. He said, "Oh, son of a black woman." There's nothing wrong with the description, son of a black woman, son of a white, but of course, it was the way in which he said it. It was derogatory, right, in that sense. And Sayyidina Bilal was deeply hurt by that. He came into Islam. And Islam, this doesn't fly. And imagine people who face a similar thing today, constantly. People who come from a different ethnicity, Black people in particular, come into a context and they're seen as, less than, when, wait a second, Islam is supposed to, all of this is supposed to wipe out. Now I step into a Muslim space and that is still there. How is that? And so Sayyidina Bilal, he goes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or the Prophet gets word of this. He calls Abu Dhar and he tells him, Ya Abu Dhar, innaka imri'un fika jahiliyyah. He says, you are a man that still has inside of you jahiliyyah. You still have ignorance inside of you. You still have stuff from pre-Islam. This is not us. This is not. And it's said in some of the narrations that it's a beautiful scene, subhanAllah, when you think about it. Abu Dhar recognized what he did wrong. He put his head on the ground and he told Sayyidina Bilal to come to step on him, right, as a form of trying to get, I don't know, compensated or something. And Bilal, he picks him up and kisses him on the head. That's the type of, that was the sort of, tarbiyah that the Prophet ﷺ gave to the companions. That's the love that he instilled in their hearts that allowed them to even overcome those difficult situations, right? It's not something bad happens and then forget it. We're never people make mistakes, right? We're products of our environment. We may not be people who have racism in our heart, but it's around us. And maybe there's others who do, or we've heard certain terms and then something happens and you say something that you don't mean or something, right? And if the other party is also not accepting, you can't work towards reconciliation, but that's a beautiful example of how things worked out.
One of the purposes of the Prophet ﷺ's mission was to eradicate tribalism.
Absolutely.
Because it generates arrogance. And arrogance is, as we all know, is Shaitan's.
Arrogance is the first sin, right?
Sin.
Yeah.
And for him to say to Abu Dhar that there's still Jahiliyyah, it means that he had that. It's an exercise. It doesn't happen overnight. It's an exercise that you have to keep training yourself to be able to master your ego, to be able to have an intellectual humility, I think. And so that was that could be one of the reasons that the Prophet ﷺ addressed Abu Dhar that way.
Yes.
And when he put his head on the ground for Bilal to step on him, I mean, that's when he understood, oh my God. I mean, the Prophet has been talking about this thing, and that's exactly what I did. So we just realized it.
Right.
So it takes, what I'm trying to say is that it's not an overnight thing. It takes some meeting and seeing people and talking to people and attending lectures like this and all of us. And it's not something that is impossible, because they're the generation of the Sahabis and their followers who were transformed absolutely 180 degrees from what they were within a quarter of a century. So tribalism is one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ was deadly against.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, they've gone back to that.
Mm.
And now we see that you mentioned that Sayyid and this and that and this culture and that culture. Whereas in the beginning, when the first 100 years of the Prophet ﷺ passed away, Muslims spread all over the world. I mean, it's a matter of history, it's not here.
Absolutely.
And they settle in every place.
Absolutely. Yes, subhanAllah. Beautiful points. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you for sharing. And you said something very important, right? There's a process. But the first part is identifying in your heart, right? Is there jahiliyyah in my heart still? Some stuff that I hold on to. When I see somebody from this who looks like this, do notions come into my mind? I mean, we saw some horrible things. By the way, this is you know what Trumpism, I'm sorry, I'm not going to talk about politics, but it has a bearing on race, right? You know what Trumpism is by and large about, and all of this, the January 6th riots and all of these things, it's mainly embedded in the issue of race. That this country is no longer going to stand for these racist symbols and things of the past. Confederate statues are being pulled down, Confederate flags are being pulled down, the last vestiges, but there's some people that are like, no, we don't want this, you know what I'm saying? And so we lived this in this recent past, right? Imagine how it wasn't, even before in America, the civil rights movement, these giants, fought for civil rights, and all of this history that we have. It's important that we reflect and understand, well, what about me, right? What about me? Where do I stand? And one part is just even the reflection of self, but then the other is like, well, what am I doing in society to eradicate, these symbols of racism and so forth in the world? Yes.
So we're talking about racism. So if you look in 2021, the Palestine event that happened in Palestine, where the Jewish people were making fun of Muslims trying to take them out of Palestine, try to own Palestine, and then the Muslims saying stuff back to the Jews. That whole thing is like a thing where people need to see that, like, even though someone's doing something bad to you, like the Jews were, the Muslims still held back. They name one Muslim person that killed another Jewish one and shot a Jew in the head. Not a single Muslim, but the Jews continue to do that. The Muslims still stayed back. So that Palestine event is also part of racism, where if you take notes from it, Muslim people really do not do that much, except for stay quiet and post on Instagram, social media, that free Palestine and multiple other things.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about a couple other things. Just a couple of other points that are, worth mentioning. When we talk about race, we talk about the beauty of diversity, and we talk about Islam and talk about history and what's happened. Our brothers started to mention, there's a famous quote by Ibn Khaldun, who is a great historian, Muslim historian, in his Muqaddimah. He said that إِنَّ حَمَلَةَ الْعِلْمِ فِي الْإِسْلَامِ أَكْثَرُهُمْ الْعَجَمِ. He said something really interesting. He said that most of the people who upheld knowledge, who were the carriers of knowledge, the scholars, were the Ajam, not the Arab. It's very powerful, right? We think, many people think of the Arabs as the center of the Muslim world and so on and so forth. But he says, this great historian, he says, it was the non-Arab, Ajam it means non-Arab, right? People who don't speak Arabic. The non-Arabic Muslims were the majority of scholarship over the course of centuries. And I just put this slide together real quickly today, but I didn't really do it justice. There is a nice article in Yaqeen Institute where they talked about this concept, and they broke it down further. So there is this this statement by him needs to be weighed a little bit more. There's actually did some studies. They took the names of scholars of some of the books of old, like a couple of thousand names, and they actually took the percentage of how many were Arab and how many were not Arab. And they found some interesting numbers. Like, it was interesting. So it said, like, in Medina in the first century, um, 80% were Arab and 20% were non-Arabs. In Mecca, 80% were non-Arabs and 20% were Arabs. And so in different places, the numbers were different. And then over the centuries, the numbers changed. As the centuries went on, more non-Arab scholarship was the majority of scholars in the Muslim world and so on. So if you look at some of the main names, and these are the foremost names. So the greatest Arabic language scholar that ever lived, his name was Sibawayh. Anybody who studied Arabic extensively knows his name. He was a great grammarian, and he was a Persian man. The greatest hadith scholar, Imam al-Bukhari, as you all know, he's from Uzbekistan, thousands of miles away from Medina. And actually 5 out of the 6 main scholars of the main works of hadith are non-Arab. Imam al-Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam al-Nasa'i, Imam Abi Dawood, and Imam Ibn Majah. Imam Ahmad is the only, she's not one of the 6, sorry. Tirmidhi, sorry, Tirmidhi was also non-Arab. So I think one of them had some Arab roots. Anyways, the greatest scholar in the science of Balagha. Balagha is an Arabic language related field. Abdul Qahir al-Jurjani, the great scholar, also from the Khorasan, Iran region. In fiqh, Imam Abu Hanifa was also from the area of Baghdad in Iraq, and at that time he was not from Arab roots, and so on and so forth, right? So we see the beauty of diversity reflected in how Muslims were given a space to excel in the deen. This is really interesting. This is worth your study too. If you look at, there's a group in the generation after the Sahaba, they're called the what? The Tabi'een, right? In the generation of the Tabi'een, there was what's called the Mawali. The Mawali were the freed slaves, right? And the freed slaves of the Sahaba and some of the other Arabs in that generation, because slavery existed before. Islam came and it, by and large, almost destroyed it altogether. The freed slaves were some of the foremost scholars in most of the different sciences related to the Sharia. And the freed slaves, they came from all different backgrounds, African, Central Asian, and so on and so forth, right? And so they were the main scholars in all of these different, so that shows you how, this is a beautiful quote. I want you to read this and then maybe somebody has any reflections. This is by Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah, Hafidhullah, one of the great scholars of today. I want you to read this and share your reflections. What do you gain from this?
So this is a very nice code, and it's very beautiful. But in reality, I'm talking about our communities, especially in Muslim minority countries, such as the United States, things do not reflect like that. So, for example, I can talk about our community. So the observant Muslims, usually, they live in a cocoon. They do not have interaction with their neighbors, their workers. Maybe they have transactional relationship with their colleagues, just business life.
Mhm.
Now, there is another group of Muslims which is not so, we can call them not so observant.
Okay.
So they are more, you can see them, more mingling with their co-worker or their neighbor. So I just want to, get your viewpoint, how usually we observant Muslim, how should we interact?
Good question. I love what the point. Let's put that on the side for 1 second, and I think that's a very important, extremely important discussion point. Put on the side for one moment. Just want to catch any other reflections that anybody has of this quote by Dr. Omar. Anybody? Sure, you
Basically,
wanna go?
I think it reflects that wherever Islam went, it adapted that society. In addition to keeping their own principles and their own folklore, they then attached themselves to their own traditions or culture, but they adapted wherever they settled down.
Yeah, beautiful. And that's one of the beautiful things about Islam. You travel through the world, right? And you see the different colors of Islam. Islam has this adaptability built into it that is beautiful, that it doesn't come to overpower other cultures. Rather, people sometimes they talk about Islam versus culture. It's a wrong construct. We don't have this construct, Islam versus culture. There are some things that some Muslims do and they're cultural and they think they're Islamic, but they maybe have nothing to do with Islam. That's something different, but Islam is not against culture. Islam embraces culture. In fact, we have this primary principle in the study of fiqh that we say in the ada muhakkama, that the tradition, the cultural tradition, the custom has I don't know the right word to translate, has the ability to it takes precedent. The custom, it takes precedent Islamically, meaning if there's something that happens, a transaction, some interaction that takes place, and in that culture, when you transact and you do it that way, this is what the answer or this is what the ruling should be. That's what takes precedent. Meaning what the people of the land do, that's what Islam acknowledges in a particular land. So if Chinese people do something this way and Muslims are engaged in something, and Islam doesn't have any direct reference as to that particular thing, we take by what those people do there. If Muslims in some other part of the world, so on, right? So culture is a very important construct in Islam that Islam never came to overpower, to override, to destroy, to take apart. Some people still have this notion today that that's the case. But I love this quote by Dr. Omar where he basically says, the river flows over the different rocks, that is the sea of humanity, and it shines, it brightens, enlightens those different rocks. And so with that, our brother brought up a good discussion point. And I'm first of all, I'm curious to hear if others feel that it's a accurate kind of statement. I don't want to pass my own judgment. And then I think it's a good point to discuss. You mentioned that observant Muslims, whatever that means, right? Maybe people that identify or are more identified as practicing Muslims, they tend to not blend in with society as much. People who are maybe less observant or whatever that means, they are maybe more neighborly, engaged deeper in society and not transactional like that first group of people. You think it's an accurate sort of statement?
I think to a degree,
To a
because
degree.
if you go back one more slide where you were showing Nicodemus, quote is that most of the Islamic teachings came from people of Adam, non-Arab.
Yeah.
Is that that's what happens when this is the result of getting knowledge, keep getting over
the ignorance. Because when one is involved in tribalism, let's keep it a tribalism.
Mhm,
Their field of vision is like this.
mhm,
But the Quran, whatever the Quran says, the teaching of the Quran and the transformation that has been wrought by the Quranic teachings makes people's visions like this. Like 180 degrees, your peripheral vision is 180.
mhm,
Not just physically, but intellectually.
mhm,
And that is what the objective of the Quran is, and of the early scholars of Islam is, that and then going back and then going forward to that quote, that the long quote that you just played, indicates, as I think Hazrat Umar once said, that the Muslim Ummah is an Ummah of diversity, not an Ummah of uniformity.
mhm,
There's a difference between diversity and uniformity.
mhm, mhm.
So it's these kind of things that we have to educate ourselves. When you said that it has to come from the heart, it has to come from the heart, because unless and until these teachings and the Quran, I always, whenever I talk to kids or everywhere, always keep it to the Quran. Unless the Quran goes down from our throat into our heart, it's very difficult to do. And that's what happened with the Sahaba.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well said,
and that's what we need.
well said. Unless the Quran goes from our throats into our hearts, right? And by the way, that was the description of who, that the Quran didn't go past their throats. That was a description of the Khawarij, right? That was the famous description of them, these people who didn't understand Islam. Externally, they displayed Islam, but internally, they were empty. And so I think your comment about, so-called observant or practicing Muslims maybe not, don't put themselves out there into society as much as they should, because that's what truly as a Muslim you should do. If you're talking about da'wah and you're talking about bringing Islam to the world and being an accurate representation, it doesn't mean you sit in some bubble somewhere. It means you have an impact in the society around you, right? And so my take on your comment would be, is that we sometimes our definitions of observant are short-sighted, right? And we've internalized these things, right? A lot of people internalize, well, that person is an observant or practicing Muslim because he has one of these, or because if it's a woman, she wears hijab, or because, and those are important signs for, as far as, or they go to the masjid and but that's part of the picture, right? The other part of the picture is how does a person treat others, right? How does a person, what is he doing contributing to society? You all know that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, أكثركم إيمانا أنفعكم للناس. Those of you that have the most iman are the ones that are most beneficial to people. So iman is not a personal venture, right? Don't confuse ibadah with a full definition of iman. My ibadah that I do for myself, I benefit myself. It's not going out to everybody else. The Prophet ﷺ says the one who has the most iman is the one who's helping the world, right? Not just helping himself, right? And so part of it is some of the constructs in terms of what we have kind of been led to think or been taught as to what is a real Islam. Well, a real Islam is not just somebody who just goes to the masjid and that's their life, back and forth, and that's their life. And there's zero impact in the world around them, right? In fact, they don't see anything around them because they're so focused on that. But that, meaning this, the masjid is only a place to get the spiritual nourishment that you need to go out there, right? And I think that's where it's a big kind of misconnect or disconnect, right, in terms of this whole thing. But I think that's an important point. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts or.
I think this comes down a lot to personalities, that some people are just more comfortable teaching others. And this comes down to how, like, an understanding if you grew up in a certain environment, if you were used to mingling with a lot of different races, and you're already naturally uncomfortable. So I think it's not so much about being observant and not versus just what you're comfortable and naturally doing all the time, what you've been doing.
To expand on Mr. Mana's point, just lost my train.
See,
We'll come back.
the intellect is going, man. It's moving. Mashallah. Well, it's a good thing. Alhamdulillah. Yes.
I was gonna say that it's easy to observe others, not knowing what you're going through, and sort of judge as to what they're doing. I think for us as Muslims, more important thing is to self-reflect. And also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أحسن عملا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this death and life so that we could test who amongst ourselves as excellent. So going back to the problem that we're talking about, that people become rigid in Islam, this tunnel focus. Allah is not expecting us to be tunnel focused. He's expecting us to live the life, but at the same time have the focus on the long-term success, which is the success of Akhirah. And how do you get that? Through Amal. And what are those Amal? To be nice to others, to be living the life and helping others and things like that.
It is these kind of things that we need to teach our next generation. Because they don't know these things. They only come to the masjid. We only have, even our generation, we only have, excuse my expression, an emotional attachment to that view. First Tarawih, when is the Tarawih? What day is it? What time is Tarawih? Before Tarawih is the Fard Namaz that you have to say. Tarawih is just nothing. And then we have Ramadan, Tell me who lost weight in Ramadan. Ramadan is about eating less and thinking more. So unless we think, we have to improve ourselves. We have to, when Dr. Hassan said about observant and non-observant, we have to, we don't interact with the people outside our culture or even within our community, in our neighborhoods, because we don't know much about ourselves. Because if they say something that they heard on Fox News, right, and we've also heard it, but we kind of, just got away from it. They're looking for an answer. They're looking for a reasonable answer, not like, jihad.
What a statement! It is a fantastic statement.
So in order to sometimes, in order to come back to the people in a good way, we have to get away from them. When people are saying bad things, or when people are, when people are saying bad things or negative things, you just separate yourself from them, and then think about where they're coming from and where you are, and it's an education. It's a journey of education.
Mashallah, this has been educational for me as well. That was a beautiful point you just made. I want to repeat it for those who maybe didn't catch it. That sometimes we're afraid to interact with the external society, not because we're afraid of something of them, but because we don't even know our own self. And I think that's a powerful statement, because if we don't know our own self, we don't know our deed, we don't know and we're afraid, well, when we go and we present ourselves as Muslim, but we really, learning and understanding is a lifelong venture and so forth. But for some people, never really done internal reflection and understanding and so on and so forth. And that is part of. There's a beautiful statement of Sayyidina Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. He said, the fifth rightly guided Khalifa. He said, رحم الله امرأ عرف قدر نفسه. That may Allah's mercy be on the person that knows himself, that knows his limitations and knows his capacities. And, you know, understanding ourselves, you know, the old Greek saying, say, know thyself. Man, know thyself. This is our version of that. May Allah's mercy be on may Allah's mercy be on the one that understands his capacity, his limit and his limitations, right? He knows what he can do, what he can't do. And so I'm not sure about our timing. I'm happy to keep going. I'm enjoying the discussion, but I'm also looking for direction from our masjid leaders.
Yeah, I think we're to wrap this up.
Okay, great. Well, alhamdulillah, Allah bless you all for your good listening. Allah bless our brothers and sisters who participated in the conversation. I hope it was beneficial. I hope it was something, at least, you know, to prompt some self-reflection. And we look forward to joining the community sometime again in the future. اللهم اجعلنا من الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون احسنه. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله